Welcome to Forum 360, sponsored by the Knight and GAR Foundations on Fusion, your PBS channel. I'm Stephanie York, your host today. Thank you for joining us for a global outlook with a local view. The United Way of Summit County underwent a huge metamorphosis in the past few years, with Jim Mullen, its president and CEO, leading the charge for change. And he is here today to talk with us about the exciting changes to the agency and what it means for our community. United Way, through its 4 bold goals, has literally transformed the fabric of philanthropy in Summit County. Today we will learn about United Way's current plans and future goals, all the changes to its programming and funding sources, their exciting move to a new and bigger facility at the gateway to downtown Akron, and what all this means for our local community and beyond. Welcome, Jim Mullen, President and CEO of United Way of Summit County. Jim, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Stephanie.
Of course. I would like to start off with you telling us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you ended up in Summit County as the CEO and President of United Way.
Sure. So Northeast Ohio is home. So, I think that's first and foremost why I'm here. Grew up in Cleveland, started my career in Cleveland in nonprofit, and eventually ended up with the United Way of Greater Cleveland. So started the United Way of Greater Cleveland about 12 years ago, and at the time never really thought United Way would be a career, typical of a younger professional just trying to figure out what you wanted to do. And over the course of time, what I found is that United Way wasn't a single entity in a specific community. It was a network of United Ways across the country, and quickly started to understand that there's a lot to learn. And one of the things that I pride myself is to be a constant learner, and an opportunity to leave home and go to another United Way somewhere else presented itself. So I ended up in the United Way of Metropolitan Nashville, in Nashville, Tennessee, and took that opportunity and spent 4 years down there learning as much as I possibly could about how the United Way network across the country and across the world was kind of changing from within. And the Nashville United Way was one of those leaders in that change. So spent some time down there, and then one day saw an opportunity to come back home and didn't think much of it, to be quite honest, and threw my hat in the ring, and a short time later ended up back here with the United Way of Summit County.
That's fabulous, and we're happy to have you,
Yes,
and lucky to have you
good
here in Summit County. There's been a true metamorphosis of the United Way and how its funds and programs operate since you've taken the helm. Can you explain what changes have been made, particularly addressing the United Way bold goals?
Sure. So I think one of the things that the board recognized through the search process, and I think initially when I started as the CEO, was the model of United Way that had been done throughout Summit County for the first 100 years was solely based in fundraising. And the reality was that the competitive space around philanthropy, particularly fundraising, was starting to get to the point where if you're just a transactional relationship in fundraising, you're probably going to lack the legs to survive long term. So what we did as an organization is prioritized engagement, volunteerism, getting people actively involved in the community, and then the impact work secondary, knowing that if we engage people and we drive them towards impact work, eventually their financial resources will follow. So it's a subtle thing, but for us it was a pretty monumental shift, going from United Way being known, particularly in Summit County, as a fundraising organization to an impact and engagement centered organization. So as we did that, the first thing we did is we wanted to make sure that there's opportunities for people to get involved, as I said, around volunteering. So quickly, end of 2015, we ramped up for 2016 a full-fledged volunteer engagement program where we worked with our corporate partners in the community to give people the opportunity to get involved. At that same time, we started to really look at how are we making an impact. And what we saw, quite honestly, and I've used this phrase a lot, is we were an inch deep and a mile wide in terms of how we were funding programs in the community. So we were trying to be a little to a lot of different things.
Sure.
And I think the point that we tried to go to was a very strategic focus on specific metrics that allow us to get above the 30,000-foot view to see systems change across the community. So over the course of 18 months, a group of community leaders and volunteers dove into data and spent a lot of time looking at community conditions and the data of the Summit County community to determine where the greatest needs and gaps were. And that's where we ended up with the 4 bold goals, which we announced just about 18 months ago. to the community of our aim and our strategic direction, and where we would start funding programs and work programmatically together.
So basically, in a very simplistic view, as I knew United Way back before these bold goals, is I would give money to United Way, and they would give it to something, one of the charities that I wanted you to give to, and that was like you were like a pass through, almost, and didn't really have any. What would you call it?
We didn't have any hierarchical or goals of our own. We were a conduit to other people doing work in the community.
Correct.
And where we were going was we wanted to become a conduit for actual impact work that was driven through the collaborative work of United Way.
Right. So now you have these 4 bold goals. Tell me what they are.
So the first one, the first 2 focus on education. So the first one is early childhood education. So one of the things as we looked at the data is we realized that organizations that we partner very closely with, like GAR, Summit Education Initiative, were all focused on early childhood and the kindergarten readiness. And that is a key component of our goal. Our first goal is ensuring that 65% of the Akron Public School kids are reading on grade level in the 3rd grade. 3rd grade is really the key indicator of future success in terms of learning and curriculum. And right now we're not doing good enough for these students in terms of getting them on grade level in the 3rd grade. The second one, a lot of organizations across the country, particularly United Way, have focused on graduation rates. And graduation rates are important, but there's a secondary factor that we think was very important to us. So we're looking at improving the graduation rates again in the Akron Public Schools to 90%, while at the same time ensuring that 60% of those graduates are college and career ready. So we're taking an extra step. It's not enough to just graduate kids, but what actually happens to those kids as they're entering into adulthood to ensure that they're either college ready, attending a 2 or 4 year university, or career ready, entering into a sustainable career where they can earn an income that gets them a sustainable wage in our community. The third is financially empowering 11,000 individuals. So close to 45% of Summit County residents are what we term the working poor. So they're asset limited, income restrained, and employed. And what that means for us is we're trying to work with that group to get them to a place again of financial sustainability and independence. So working with them on growth of income, managing their debts, building their assets, getting them into affordable banking relationships, and building their budgets. And then the last, which is probably the one we didn't think we'd spend a lot of time in when we entered into this, we're going through this right as the crisis was starting to bubble up in the community, and that was the opioid crisis. So Bold Goal 4 is around ensuring that we reduce the number of overdose visits in our emergency rooms across the county, and reduce the number of people that are actively using addicted to drugs in Summit County.
Those are huge goals.
They are.
I mean, they are just monumental, massive. Whose idea was it to bring bold goals to Summit County? And is Summit County new in doing this?
So I think it was a collaborative thought process of our board volunteers, those community leaders that we brought into that community impact task force, and then the staff. And I think one of the things that we knew as an organization, for us to start to feel different to the people that are investing dollars in us, we actually had to put something out there that was different. And I think you kind of mentioned it earlier in your question. United Way's only barometer of success forever was a campaign thermometer. So, we put the thermometers out in the community and say, well, this is how we're determining if we're successful. And a lot of people started to say to us, well, but what happens to those dollars? How do we know that positive things are happening in the community? So for us, I think it was a combination of such, all of that kind of going into the hopper and saying, you know what, if this is going to be a new dynamic United Way, we had to put something out there that people could really bite into and quickly understand. And I think the bold goals have done that.
The community has really seemed to embrace this change, and many organizations are jumping on board to either help out by providing volunteers or to fund certain bold goals, and even changing their own funding strategies to match United Way's funding strategies. Can you talk about some of those organizations and how you've been able to win them over?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've said this a lot over the last really 2.5 years. I think Summit County and Akron, Ohio are unique. So if you looked around the community and looked at, or around the country and looked at communities that are changing from within, they have richness of similarities. One being higher ed. So they have strong higher education institutions in their footprint that allows them to focus on research and development and growth of a community. Second is population size. So sometimes you're a little bit too big to change, and you're too small to change. I think Summit County and Akron are that right size community that has enough to it where change really matters. And then the third thing that happened is there was an enormous amount of leadership change happening in Summit County
Right.
over the same time. So what I think you saw was a lot of people coming together, a lot of change happening, and a lot of people looking at things from a different lens. And as that happened, I think what we started to do is gain a lot of trust of United Way is different, and they're starting to not only talk about being different, but the actions were really important. So I said earlier, the engagement first before the impact, that was intentional. We wanted people to see that United Way is getting actively involved in the community in a different way, to see that happen. But really, when you start to look at it, we were strategic in really starting to work with the superintendent of the Akron Public Schools, the mayor of the city of Akron, our county executive and their staffs, the GAR Foundation, Summit Education Initiative, Connexus, NEO, organizations like that, that are a lot of backbone type organizations that if we start to kind of point those arrows all in the same direction, we can systemically start to make change, even if our missions are a little bit different. If we can align those arrows going in the same direction and we're impacting the same families and individuals, we might be able to see change happen.
So I'm wondering, if the community is rallying around these four goals, and they really seem to be, who's helping out the elderly and the disabled right now? Because they seem to be kind of lost in this mix.
Yeah. It's a great question, and I think one of the things that we've done in recency that probably went a little bit under the radar was the merger and acquisition of InfoLine Summit County. So for us, there's really two ways to look at this. The first being United Way is not abandoning basic needs. So one of the things that we've done is ensure that we continue to fund basic needs, which would be dollars available to the older adult population, the disabled, things like that.
Because we're all going to be there.
Exactly. It's going to happen eventually. And I think one of the things that we were excited about is in our last funding cycle, we invested more in basic needs than we had in several decades. So we gave more dollars out in those most vulnerable situations than we ever had before. And I think that's important. And one thing that we didn't talk about, a lot of people ask, well, why didn't we do a fifth bold goal that really emphasized on that? And one of the things about basic needs is sometimes doing the right thing is just the right thing to do, and measuring is not the most important thing. So for us to spend nearly 25% of our entire allocations pool on basic needs was an important thing, and one that we probably could have done a better job of communicating. The secondary thing is the InfoLine merger into United Way.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so United Way took over as of July 1, InfoLine for Summit County, which is a 24-hour day, 7-day-a-week information referral service line known as 2-in-1. So as you'll know it now moving forward under United Way, you'll know it as 2-in-1. And then the secondary program is housing services. And the primary demographic on both of those that we serve are the older adults and the disabled. So again, those programs and services are offered 24 hours a day, 7 days a week by calling 2-in-1. Here in your local community, you'll be connected to a live person here in our community that will help refer services or provide services directly to help get scheduled appointments or whatever those individuals need to help meet those needs. So there's really a two-prong approach right now from United Way in terms of addressing those specific demographic needs in our community.
That sounds great. I'd like to remind our viewers and those who may have joined late that we are here with Jim Mullen, President and CEO of United Way of Summit County. And we're talking about the sweeping changes United Way has made to their funding process, the overall changes to the organization since Jim took over the President and CEO position about 3.5 years ago. So this 2-in-1 system is a pretty recent acquisition.
Yep.
How's it working?
Well, I think one of the things I think a lot of people do and don't know that this is available in our community. So InfoLine Summit County has been around for 30 years. And I think one of the things that we were interested in is ensuring that this becomes, when you're in crisis in our community, we don't want you to remember 20 different phone numbers. We want you to remember one, and it's 2-in-1. So whether it's housing, shelter issues, domestic violence, a community crisis happens, we want individuals in our community to know the first thing that they do is they pick up the phone and they dial 2-in-1. So the integration has gone actually surprisingly really well, because anytime you're integrating history of organizations like that, coupled with a move into a new space, it's not always easy. But quite honestly, it's gone exceedingly well. We're seeing some synergy in terms of how the organizations have come together to use best practice to ensure that we're meeting client need better. And I think the future of 2-in-1 and housing services in Summit County is going to not only be exciting, but it's going to be growing, and that's the best part about it.
Is United Way the right spot for you, 211, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, we're not interested in acquisitions and mergers for the sake of doing them. One of the things that we did, again, as our board worked through this with their board, was across the country, more frequently than not, United Ways are operating the 211 system for their local community. This wasn't foreign to United Way. Actually, if you went to United Way Worldwide's website, it's one of the only programs that's highlighted as a network-wide program, is the 211 information referral. And in the state of Ohio, the two largest United Ways, Cincinnati and Cleveland, are operating the majority of the state outside of Summit. So even in the state of Ohio, it was a very easy transition in terms of it coming under the United Way umbrella.
That's great. You did mention that this all came about when you were moving into a new building.
Yeah.
So it's not just a new building, it's a historic building.
It is.
Can you tell us about the building and,
Sure.
and that move and how it all came about?
Yeah, so we're in growth mode, and I think that's a wonderful thing. I think that's something that our community needs. So our old building on 90 North Prospect Street, we had been there 60, 70 years. And that building was actually built in the 80s, and we were in there before that. But we were growing out of space. And once we came to an agreement on a lot of things that we were doing programmatically, it became obvious that for us to continue to grow and be a healthy organization, we needed to find an alternative location. So again, through partnership with the city, the county, and the Akron Public Schools, we entered into an agreement to acquire the Sojourner Truth Building on 37 North High Street. Which we're ecstatic about. It's only about 2-block move, but the difference between High Street and Prospect is significant in terms of being that kind of gateway into the downtown community. And a lot of wonderful things are happening on High Street. So the middle of July, end of July, we moved officially into that location. And then just a couple weeks ago, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, we actually honored wonderful individuals in this community, the Tom and Lisa Mendel, who generously donated $1 million to United Way. So the building now officially is known as the Thomas and Lisa Mendel Community Center at Sojourner Truth. And I can't honestly think of a better family in terms of philanthropy in this community in Northeast Ohio than the Mendels, and then the legacy of what Sojourner Truth meant to this community from a civil rights and a women's rights movement. Those two things together, in terms of what United Way's mission is, just made so much sense. So we're excited about where we are.
That's great. And I realize that this new facility has a room in it that you could actually have some of your events, so you don't have to rent out. So it actually, in the long run, will be a saver for you guys.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the number one thing that's come up is, well, why does United Way need to do that? What was the cost? Well, the first thing is we can say confidently the value of the acquisition far exceeded what we paid, which was an important thing. The second thing is, because of the generosity of the Mendels, the costs were taken on by a donor. As opposed to community funds. And then the third thing, you mentioned it, there's a lot of operational savings. So, all but our major event, our annual meeting, will be able to be housed within our facility now, which will be significant annual cost savings to us in the 5-figure range every single year. And as you start to kind of accumulate that over time, you'll see a savings. On top of that, there is tenant space in that first floor of our building, and once we have those tenants in place, we'll almost be a net zero in terms of the costs between the old building and the new building.
That's incredible. And then, if anybody reading the newspaper along the way saw what it took collaboration-wise between the city, the county, and the schools and United Way to get that building for United Way's use. I mean, it was like a shell game with all these moving parts and pieces, and for everybody to work together for that one end. I mean, I've been involved in complicated processes before, but wow, that was really something.
And I think the thing that we're most excited about, because I think oftentimes health and human service organizations like United Way are often not thought about from an economic development piece, but for us, all of those moving pieces all were centered around economic development. And what you're going to see, particularly from High Street to Main Street, you're going to see somewhere between 700 and 1,000 more people in those 2 blocks because of the move of buildings.
Incredible.
Which means more people working downtown. And then some of the other parcel changes between the schools, the city, and the county, you're already seeing housing development happening in West Akron off of Mall Avenue because of it. So all of it was around development of community and growth of population and things like that, and we were happy to be a part of it. and think the long game here is a really important thing for us.
Well, and that all these organizations realize how important that is for the community is what's really important and shows. So I just read in the paper about all these backpacks you gave out. Can you tell me about that? Because that's a volunteer process that you were talking about.
Yeah, so United Way has done Stuff the Bus for 5 years now. When I arrived, it was a kind of a collect as you can priority, but not really a priority. And when we got here and we started that engagement model, we really wanted Stuff the Bus to be the signature program. So we went out immediately and we got a corporate sponsor, so Steer Enterprises, Brock Steer, Bill Steer, and Brian Steer, generously the family got involved early adopters, which we needed to start to scale this program. So 3 years ago, we went to 3 Akron public schools. And this year, through the efforts of nearly 1,000 volunteers, 300,000 supplies, we were able to go to 22 Akron public schools on the second day of school and deliver a backpack to every kid, which was nearly 5,000 backpacks handed to each student. The important thing for us is not the outputs. It's really, for us, it's about tools and dignity. And I think that's a really important thing. You know, as a student enters into this classroom and the cost of supplies no longer are, it's not always affordable. If you have 3 or 4 kids, you could be spending $500 to $1,000 a year just on supplies. And sometimes you're not able to do that. So what we try to do is level the playing field so that when those kids are sitting next to each other and they question, well, why does one student have what I don't have? We try to help them all start on the same level so they can begin that learning process and have that dignity of learning on an equal playing field with their peers. And I think that's an important thing. So volunteers hand them out, which is awesome. So the volunteers go to the school, they hand the kids the backpacks. The kids are excited, the volunteers are excited. It's a really great experience.
Did I read it went from 3 schools to 22 schools?
Yeah, so 3 schools 3 years ago to 22 schools. We're not stopping until we get to every elementary school in Akron Public Schools, which is 28. And then we'll move on to the next district of need to continue to grow this program. We've been completely humbled by the corporate support and the community support that we've received in terms of individuals stepping up to help provide for these kids that sometimes can't provide for themselves or their parents can't provide for them. So, you know, it's a little thing. You know, we often get asked, how does that tie to Bold Goal 1 or Bold Goal 2? There's never going to be a clear metric of, well, this helped us achieve 3rd grade reading. But if we can take the barriers and the hurdles out of the life of these kids, like having the right things to start the school year.
Having pencils and paper and erasers.
Then we think eventually those are going to help change curriculum in terms of kids' scores and testing related to the curriculum that's being taught in the classroom. It
seems that with all these volunteers and the change from 3 schools to 22 schools, there's a hunger in Akron and Summit County for people to donate their time to do things like this. And I noticed that also with the Build the Playground thing. My husband went out and helped build that playground. There were tons of volunteers. Tell us a little bit about that.
So in one day in Kenmore neighborhood, we built a playground with the city of Akron at Prentice Park. Over the course of that day, we had close to 300 volunteers come out, and really from start to finish.
It was a rainy day, too.
It was a rainy day, but there's no playground there, and by the end of the day, there's a full playground up and built. It's an awesome program as part of our 100th anniversary, which this year is the 100th anniversary of United Way of Summit County. We wanted to partner with the city and make sure that we left a lasting impression. So that playground at Prentice Park will be something that we hope is a beacon to that community to give kids and families the opportunity to do something, to get outside and be a family and do things together. But it's really, to your point, what we've seen, Stephanie, ongoing is the growth in our volunteer numbers is incredible. So year over year, we continue to have 200% to 300% increases in the number of volunteers that are coming around the organization, wanting to do more. For us, it's really a capacity issue. It's not a desire not to want to do more.
Sure.
It's, you know, every month we have 2 or 3 volunteer opportunities for people to get involved in the community that require, you know, hundreds to at times close to 1,000 volunteers. So for us, we're going to continue to do that. We're going to continue to push on scale to reach to where we think we need to be, while we continue to be good stewards of donations to make sure that we're being effective and efficient in terms of how we deliver those opportunities.
And what's great about some of these, like the playground building, is these could be family volunteers. So your kids can come and help carry supplies to the people that are actually doing the building or things like that. So then you start the families with their young kids out early with this volunteerism, you know, and that just grows as they get older.
My favorite thing to see in any of the volunteer events is when you see a family come together to volunteer and you start to see the reinforcement from the adult to the next generation of saying, this is important to give back to your community, and this is how you can do it. It's not always, and it's not even necessary to write a check. Your time is as valuable as what you can give financially, and I think that is an important component of what we're doing. As I said on the early onset of this, it is about getting people involved, having them see the impact, and then having them make a conscious decision whether they want to financially support an organization. I think that's the right way to do things.
That's great. Thank you for joining us on Forum 360, sponsored by the Knight and GAR Foundations on Fusion, your PBS channel. Today we talked with Jim Mullen, United Way of Summit County's president and CEO, a person leading the charge for change in Summit County. We talked about United Way's 4 bold goals and what that means for our community in the short and long terms. We dove into some real sticky wicket issues that plague our region and what United Way is doing to tackle those real problems. And we learned more about the historic building that United Way calls home. We are lucky to have such a strong resource as the United Way of Summit County in our region, and we are fortunate that Jim Mullen came into town not content to rely on status quo. Change can be frustrating, but in this case, it seems to be the catalyst our region needs to come together to tackle huge community issues. Thank you, Jim. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for having me, Stephanie.
Absolutely.
Forum 360 is brought to you by Electrical Impulse Communications, the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, Hudson Community Television, the Rubber City Radio Group, an anonymous donor, the Jewish Community Board of Akron, Medical Mutual of Ohio, Blue Green, and Forum 360 supporters.